Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Boys Don't Cry of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka No Son, You Can't Borrow My Bullet Belt. I'm taking your mom to Chili's later tonight.
After that, you're gonna have to loosen the bullet belt.
Oh yeah, you gotta take a couple of these rounds out after some of those baby back ribs.
After that hot chili, these are gonna be tracer rounds.
Oh God, is that what we turn into when we get old?
Yeah. All right, and I am the black metal guy, aka caught up in the festive holiday spirit, voluntarily signing up for Motorhead spam.
Is that how it worked? What did you get? You got a fucking newsletter from what? The Motorhead Legacy Bureau?
I just ordered a Motorhead shirt for my sister, and they're like, "Do you want to receive updates?" And you almost always click no, right? But it's like, I think I do want Motorhead updates.
Well, I think in a situation like the situation Motorhead's in, if there are any updates, it's going to be wild.
Oh, no, like strictly merch updates.
Oh, yeah. just new designs with Snaggletooth on them.
Yeah, I'm like, why not? Yeah, there's still a Motorhead website, so I guess it's going for the Lemmy Foundation.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool then. I've got a Motorhead tattoo, but I don't have a Motorhead shirt.
Yeah.
So festive holiday season. Merry Christmas and Happy Yule to everybody. I know there's more holidays than that, but those are the only two we celebrate on the show, so that's what you get. You got any cool pagan plans, black metal guy?
Oh God.
Well, the solstice already passed. That would be the big one for you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Yule happens around the solstice and is a season, and really, we're kind of shaky on exactly when people celebrated these anyway.
Well, my guys are pretty shaky about the whole Christmas thing too, so don't worry.
Yeah. Oh yeah, isn't there like doing debate about where to place it for like?
It's like a 3-week window probably.
Yeah, that's how it is. I couldn't really I've been sick all week. I was too sick to do anything for the solstice, but I paid attention to the sun. Which when the days are this short is and when you wake up at 3 p.m. this is you got to make sure you get out there. But yeah, I couldn't do any cool solstice observance or anything, but I'm just going to the other thing is that, Christmas celebrations are basically, in many respects, very close to Yule celebrations, and I just, so I have no problem. I just go celebrate Christmas with my family.
Oh, yeah, I know about that. I just didn't know if you had a cool wrinkle in there or anything.
No, not right now. Maybe later. It's,
I'm just doing the Friendsmas things with some bandmates, and we're gonna cook a lot, so that's all I've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
No, but yeah. So happy holidays to everybody listening out there. This is in fact our final regular episode of the year. Next week we will, as is tradition, have our Terminus Omega end of the year list that we will plan on being cleaner and more concise than the year before, and then we'll spiral into 4 hours of madness, as is tradition.
What if we literally just read the lists up front and then talked about them?
What, to reduce our view time on YouTube? You gotta think about the algorithm here.
Yeah, you're right. That's right, we gotta draw it out.
Yeah, exactly.
What if we didn't mention any of the bands until the 4th hour and then just read the lists off and then ended the podcast?
Oh, God. That is the sort of interminable, upsetting thing that I can't even fathom subjecting people to. Just 4 hours of just fluffy, abstract noodling about music.
We just talk about the genesis and metaphysical destiny of Chilean war metal.
We cover transcendental black metal, I do a quick interpretive piece on hand drums that I've been collecting for the past couple years, and I think
recite some poetry.
I think it'll be solid. It will be like a stick show in '87 or something. So as is tradition, we'll do our end of year list, and then we'll go on our winter break for a couple years. Yeah. We're not in fucking Game of Thrones universe. It doesn't last a couple years, for a couple weeks, and then we'll be back mid-January-ish, proper timeline pending.
And we'll probably be doing some we'll be doing some bonus shit over the break, and probably have a 2022 catch-up episode either over the break or just as our first episode next year.
Yeah, and what a brilliant segue when you talk about bonus content. So there's a few things we need you to do here at Terminus, to help us get the victory royale. So first thing you need to do is, if you're listening on YouTube or whatever podcast platform, why don't you whack that good old subscribe button so we can keep pumping those rookie numbers up and accessing more and more people. Even if you don't like it, we only put out an episode a week. We won't clutter your sub box. It's okay. After that, you're going to need to go to social media. Me, the Death Metal Guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal, for more updates and some of that parasocial interaction that you're always seeking with your favorite content creators and influencers. And finally, for the truly dedicated, for the true and cult among us, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. $3 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, and $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, where we answer the world's most important question: is bug metal a real genre?
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right. And we are charging ahead with Aamongandr by Satanic Warmaster on Werewolf Records. So, Christmas has come right on time for the Black Metal Guy this year, because we have a Satanic Warmaster record and a surprise Hate Forest release for you tonight. So we'll get to that second. And yeah, this one has been, highly anticipated, to say the least. It's been, the last one, Finnblack, was 2014. And in that time, Satanic Warmaster has become, one of the three most influential bands in the modern scene.
Probably, yeah.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Satanic Warmaster, Sargeist, and Magla, probably.
Yeah, extremely influential. And I think on the underground, Satanic Warmaster probably more than the other two.
Yeah,
it's that style of chording is everywhere. We've talked about it on the show as the Franco-Finnish style, and Werewolf and Satanic Warmaster is obviously one of the founders of that, right? And one of the people who picked up on it from France in Finland back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And presumably he is aware of the influence he's had, and was aware that doing another record would call for something special, right? Noxerer was not, pretty much everyone agrees that one was not great. Finnblack was really good, but a deliberate kind of change of pace and a expansion of the palette. And I think he knew that the next one, this one's got to be it's got to be to a T, a Satanic Warmaster record, but it's also got to do some new stuff, and it's also got to show why this band was so important in the first place. So it's a tall order. And I don't know, let's get into it from, I think maybe let's start from your responses to it, because I've kind of written my notes as a response to yours.
Yeah, so I approached this without any specific expectations. I haven't actually heard Finnblack. Just primarily what I listen to is the first three Satanic Warmaster records, and I love them all, but it's also just one of those things where they center around such a specific idea. I don't feel the need to really like keep up to date all the time. You know, if it
Sure.
pops in front of me, I'll check it out. So I didn't really know what to anticipate apart from, you know, generally more of the same, which is a good thing in this case. What I got, though, is kind of contrary to expectations, and you'd have to fill in for me if, like, Finnblack kind of, like, prepped for some of these ideas. Because I think that one of the most ambitious things that he does on this record is that it seems like a lot of the most classic sort of Franco-Finnish motifs have been removed to a degree, or at least very heavily de-emphasized. This is still distinctly Finnish black metal and distinctly Satanic Warmaster, but some of his most standard kind of melodic motifs have been pushed into the background in favor of stuff that is more aggressive and hews a little bit closer, at least to my ear, to traditional second wave black metal. There's also the expansion on the usage of keyboards in his work, which is pretty central on this record, actually, and seems to be a thing going on in Finnish black metal in general, the sort of a rediscovery of symphonic black stuff, which has obviously never disappeared from Finland, but there's definitely an emphasis being placed on it that is a little bit new, from what I'm hearing. Overall, it's a really good record. How does it stack up with the rest of Satanic Warmaster's discography? I think that's a question you'll have to ask in a few years. It's a little bit too difficult to place in it. I really enjoyed my time with it. And I think that, I mean, if there is anything that I have to say about it that would be a criticism, it's really just a matter of taste. This is a really short, really compact, really smooth kind of record. And the first time I listened to it, I felt like it just kind of slipped past me. Because this is super listenable, super catchy music. And the production is just so nice and polished. It's easy for this to just kind of go in one ear and out another if you're not paying close attention to it. Now, when you do pay close attention to it, there's a ton to discover. And there's a lot of really interesting material on this. Like yesterday, I listened to this like 3 or 4 times back to back. But I didn't feel like I was really figuring out until like that third listen. How did you feel about this? Because I think this is a record that, unusually for me, could actually serve to be a little bit longer. Like a couple more tracks just to solidify the arc of the record, because it feels like it's just... it's about 35 minutes long, and it's very well paced to the point where it's almost like paced too well. It's almost too fast. You know what I mean? Did you get any of that sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So yeah, I think this is a great album. I'm excited that he's back. But I think I agree with you about, or rather, I see what you mean about the length. It is oddly short. However, the way I think about it is just like, I'm always like, well, you deal with the album you have, and the songs you have, and I suspect what happened is that he spent a lot of time writing shit for this. He probably had more songs than this. And at the end of the day, he decided, those other 2 or 4 or whatever, I just, they're just not as good, and I'm not going to put out any sort of slop under my name. Especially not for a record like this. And I really respect that. And, there's also there's the just rigorous artistry thing and the punk condensation. I think if it's designed for a kind of listening, it is designed to be played over and over again on repeat.
It does. It works very well like that. Definitely by the end of the record, you feel like you want more, which I guess is a good thing. It's just it's highly unusual that I'm ever like, an album needs to be longer. I'm the one that always thinks that things need to be cut. But in this case, just because there is like a really serious musical development that occurs over the course of the record, like the difference between the first and the last tracks and like where the album progresses to is really stark. I just think maybe I wanted a couple more to make that process a little bit more gradual and just kind of lengthen the arc of the development there.
Fair enough. I mean, I think, this album also has it has that blistering momentum. And I think the shortness goes with that. Maybe if he attempted it's not all fast, as you point out. There are the last track in particular, which you sampled, and there's also a cool kind of break in the Duke's Ride. A very cool break that's slower. But generally, this record, more than any other Satanic Warmaster I've heard, goes for blistering speed. And I suspect the brevity might have something to do with that. So about the smoothness of it. You know, on this show, I've often criticized Finnblack imitators for sounding too smooth, right? It's just this, like, both in the sort of, like, the smoothly flowing minor scale, you know, melodies that use those chords to just glide around in nice sounding ways, and in the production, which has been beefed up to the point where it just all sounds friendly or whatever, or even stuff that's raw produced and just has, like, flowery, flowy melodies that are kind of weak. So that's the thing I'm sensitive to. I get that. What I would say is there's different kinds of smoothness. I would say here he uses the smoothness of his playing and the flow of the riffs to create heaviness and aggression, which is very different from a lot of the imitators. It's almost like he's made this record flow more on a songwriting level than, say, Corellian Satanist Madness, which depends on high contrast, right?
There is, yeah, I get what you're saying. There's a real streak of something, you know, a well that we've been coming back to over and over again, like this year. There's a real streak of just, like, heavy metal on this one. And heavy metal, you know, in its moments of heaviness it sort of arrives at those through good pacing and through playing the cool part at the right time. And this record conveys its heaviness in a similar way. You know, the sort of most explosive moments are those that arrive very naturally.
Yeah, and I think also, like, it's, you know, like, I remember, back in the day, right, you said, oh, I love Corellian Satanist Warmaster, I just wish there weren't, or Corellian Satanist Madness, I just wish there weren't all these, you know, sort of, like, stompy Norwegian parts, right? And I always thought about that for a long time. I was like, no, death metal guy, those are integral. But, you know, you think
now I understand they are. It took me some time. But
they're structurally important, but it just is true that some of those riffs don't get quite the bespoke love that the big riffs do, and are just more familiar. And here, he's just decided, you know what? People love this flowing, grandiose, Senior Voland guitar style. I'm just going to give them that. But I'm going to give it to them in this, like, but I'm going to give it to them almost without the massive, long melodies and some of that. And so that's the interesting thing. That's why I like this. So production-wise, I'll come back to that in a second. The other thing, so we talk about smoothness of songwriting. There's also smoothness of production. Production-wise, yeah, this is pushing it for me, man. Like, this is, like, pretty close to... I'm never going to let nice production put me off something that's well written, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't listen to Migla. But, like, it is very, it just sounds, I don't know, really good. High mids, you know, high mids, very clean, kind of rounded. And, you know, if the music were different, that could be really bad for me, right? I would be like, oh, this is doing the same things as the imitators. This is like pandering to the crowd or something, right? That's not the case here. The thing that makes me that I find really interesting about this record is that it embraces the core riffing style everyone associates with him, but in this really, really rigorously stripped down way, like pared back. Like, instead of these long flowing hook melodies, you'll get one or two of those on the record, a couple. Most of these are just like powerful chord block rhythm phrases. Does that sound accurate?
I think so. I think that it'd be difficult for me to say that this seems... This doesn't seem at first blush to be like that much pared back from older Satanic Warmaster material, but I think you have something more distinct in mind, because I'm usually going back to like Corellian as a reference point, and I think you're going more back to like Strength and Honor.
No, I'm thinking about Corellian. It's that, like, think about the big hooks everyone thinks about, like dun 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 dun, or the speed metally lick there, or they're just these kinds of, like, flashy, longer, big riffs.
I gotcha. To be fair, I mostly just listen to Eaten by Rats on a constant loop for days on end.
Rocking back and forth. And
like, my favorite song off that record is, like, the simplest, like, little punk track.
This is it. The whole record is like Eaten by Rats, but grimmer. And that's the other cool thing. Although the production is quite smooth, this is maybe the sternest mood he's ever done since the first record, Strength and Honor. So the riffing is more minimal. It emphasizes a much more sort of grim and scowling mood, and everything is extremely economic. And I think people might have been expecting Corellian Satanist Madness 2. I think he knew people were expecting that, and he was just like, no, like, why would I do that? And also, like leave that record alone. It's good as it is. We don't need a Corellian Satanist Madness 2. So instead, I think the concept for this is, I'm going to write Strength and Honor 2, but I'm going to do it with everything I've learned since, right? Including on this Finnblack record, where he really expanded his palette. Right? Instead of this was a classic, like, one style band. On Finnblack, he plays a ton of one-off bespoke riffs in very kind of unusual phrasings that sound more Norse or Swedish, and they just go away. It's like an album full of cool riffs stitched together in these, like, much more symphonic Emperor-style compositions. He just really, like pushed himself. And there's a lot more of those keyboards. And it sort of helped introduce this turn towards symphonic stuff in Finnish stuff. That's as you suspected. And here he's like, I'm not going to have the big flashy riffs as much, but I'm going to have dense orchestration.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have like the big... And when I have big flashy riffs, they might sound more like Dissection. Or
that is... when I saw that in your notes, I meant to bring that up. I got a huge Dissection vibe off a lot of the most elaborate parts. That was really interesting.
Especially the first track, Baphomet, which in a sense I'd love to sample every track on this record. I almost thought about it, like just doing 3 each.
Yeah.
But Baphomet was the opening single. I think everyone's heard it. What that does is really, it's a good template for the whole record. In that it starts off with some, like, very, they're kind of like sugary epic riffs, but they're played with, like, hypnotic repetition, just way longer than anyone expects. And the chorus is just this, like, sort of flowering Where Dead Angels Lie type melody that also reprises the last song of the White Death record. It's this kind of, like, nod, I think, to that kind of stuff. But it does this in this, like, this pummeling, droning context. Like, I feel like on the one hand, this is very heavy metal and very symphonic black metal, but on the other hand, it's the closest to something like Hate Forest he's done compositionally, because it's just like hammer on the root note, continuous trem, and blast beats that feel... These are songs almost entirely of blast beats, and the blasts feel fast.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need, like, punk beats for driving. He doesn't need the driving punk beats, because the blasts make it rip. So Dissection is big here. And, the other big moment was he had a big hand in 2 of the biggest Werewolf Records releases that were defining for the modern Finnish scene were these paired releases back in 2017, where the White Death self-titled, where he was playing, I'm not sure he was the riff writer, but he played guitar, keys, vocals, and Goatmoon Stella Polaris, where he was just involved in the whole process. And those had this big polished sound, and they had a lot more Norwegian and Swedish stuff in there. So this is like he's going to do he's going to do Strength and Honor, but he's going to do it with all of that added to it. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, let's go to the samples. And I thought, just to refresh people, like, get their idea of what really scowling, stern Satanic Warmaster sounds like, let's listen to a quick clip from A New Black Order off of Strength and Honor.
It's been a long time since I've listened to that record, and I forgot. It sounds a lot like Judas Iscariot in a weird way.
Yeah, I think that we always talk about the French bands, but I imagine, from what I've heard of Judas Iscariot, I imagine that was also a big part of the puzzle for these guys back in the day. I imagine he was in contact with the French and the early Finns.
Yeah, I'm working on kind of a pet theory that Judas Iscariot is like way more important than people realize as far as like influencing underground black metal styles, but I'll get to that another time where it makes more sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, basically just wanted to point people to the mood. You know, that one's based, you know, those band photos where, you know, you stand with your arms at your side down but kind of out as if they're buoyed out by, you know, like, by pagan winds or invisible muscles.
Zombie pose, you know?
Yeah, zombie pose. Yeah, so that riff is for that. You just stand there with your, like, muscle arms, which may or may not have muscles on them. You scowl.
You're forming a Kamehameha, but like an evil one.
Yeah, you just scowl. And so, and what's cool about that song is that it's very positioned like simple, quote-unquote, verse riff, complicated, flowering chorus riff, right? This is this elaborate riff that sounds a lot like the French bands he's influenced by and sets up some of the classic Satanic Warmaster turnarounds and gestures. But the riff doesn't release. It doesn't have the epic Corellian Satanist madness thing. It just keeps building tension. And he repeats it obsessively. He's like, no, we're going to do this 4 times. And what it really does is just build up tension back to the drop. And it's actually that simple bulldozer riff that's the main riff.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's designed very counterintuitively based on modern black metal standards.
Yeah, and so you can hear that even back at, like today, maybe someone wouldn't play that build-up part 4 times, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, even so, like, that's sophisticated songwriting for back in the day. Like, even though these are very simple songs, part-wise and, technically speaking, he was already thinking of smart, cool ways to do things. But yeah, so let's just do a direct comparison. We took these tracks out of order. This is just, think of how that song works, and then listen to Darkness Triumphator. This is a longer sample, but you just it conveys an idea. You have to listen that long to get an idea of the intensity. And this is you'll hear the lush production, how good it sounds, but this is also one of the most scowling, violent Satanic Warmaster tracks ever.
It is really cool. There's a lot of, like, he's got a great understanding of how to pace a black metal song. It's like how writing songs in that manner has become kind of a lost art. Like how to play a riff 8 times. You know what I mean? Which sounds like, it sounds backhanded or silly, but it really is like its own technique. There's a certain kind of riff. It's not just a really good riff. Like, a really good riff can be played 8 times and that can be miserable. You know, there's certain kinds of really good riffs that want that kind of treatment. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it tends to be simpler riffs that work better like that. It's like you think, oh, if I'm going to play this one a shit ton of times, I want all these intricacies and stuff. No, the ear just gets fatigued. It's supposed to settle in and be sort of a relaxed figure. And it's
we've talked about the ideal of the infinite riff, which is huge for me, right? It's like, and yeah, it should be shorter. You could not play the hook riffs on Corellian Satanist Madness 8 times or 16 times.
Yeah, you'd go insane.
Yeah, this first riff, it lasts a minute and almost 45 seconds. Almost 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of change in the arrangement around it. Mm-hmm. But the big thing is just when the vocals come in. He just knows that riff can carry the song. The second riff seamlessly grows out of it. It's almost just a variation on the first.
Yeah, all the riffs in the first half of that song are growing out of the same root note. Everything just keeps returning to that.
That's what I mean about this is Satanic Warmaster's drone album. It's just like he's not doing hitting the low string and then playing chords over it like Senko, but he's everything. There's a really intense root tonality on this. The second one the second one is so authoritative. He knows he doesn't need to do anything. He just goes dum 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 dum. Right, and the vocal timing over that is sick. He's a master of jamming together cool-sounding, cryptic, evil phrases. He says something like the implicit coercion of Tiamat's storms.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude.
Probably he can't say implicit. That can't be right. The explicit coercion.
Well, he's also got an idea of he really cares about vocals more on this record as far as like their rhythm and placement. It's like I've always enjoyed his like weird goblin vocals that he does. Like it's very charming, and I like how on Corellian Satanist Madness it's just him kind of like screaming paragraphs of text. That's like one of the charms about that record. Like try reading the lyrics to Eaten by Rats along with it. It's like, oh, he's just saying it as fast as possible. It's awesome.
Look, there are a lot of rats.
Yeah. There's a word for every rat. But here it's like, especially with those double tracks that he's using as punctuation points. There's a lot of care paid attention there. And also going back to the guitar work, what's really cool is all of these riffs are sped up, trimmed out riffs from Stormcrow Fleet.
You see what I mean about Stormcrow Fleet being a black metal record?
Yeah. No, I've always understood what you meant in the atmosphere, but this is the first time it's like, these could literally be off Stormcrow Fleet if you just sped it up.
And I always said the Stormcrow Fleet riffs sound like early Graveland, and this is... you told me, you like that chorus riff because it's early Graveland.
Oh, yeah, it sounds very Graveland. I wouldn't even say early. I think that could be a modern Graveland thing if they just pared back the lead guitar a little bit.
Oh, yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, you didn't say early. That is true. That could totally be a modern Graveland riff. And then 3, right? So let's talk about the structure compared... I guess there's a lot to talk about, but back to the side-by-side with A New Black Order. Basically, this is structured very similarly. You get just this vicious drone attack for the first part of the song, and in this case it's 2 riffs. It's the quote-unquote verse and the chorus. And then we got the big riff, right, with the keyboards. Right? And that has kind of the more... somewhat more flashy guitar work, although still really restrained. And you get the big riff, and like with Black Order, it's just not as important as the other riffs. And it sets up the drop back into it. But unlike that song, right, he's figured out a way to do that, but not just use it as a tension-building mechanism. Instead of being this kind of like thing that deliberately kind of strains and... stresses against itself to carry us back into the release. Even this release, even that third riff is a massive banger.
Yeah, he's found ways to carry out a similar structural conceit, but give more inherent more inherent value and listenability to all the individual components of it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. This is a deliberately homogeneous record. Mm-hmm. everything there is being voiced in the Satanic Warmaster chords. They're just being played in a really different way than from what people are going to expect.
Yeah, this is definitely a reaching back to initial influences kind of record, I would say. With that being said, though, there's still got to be the moments for the kids and, like, the simpletons like me. I want to go to Berserk Death. I know that I put my notes in first, but you knew the part I was going to sample the moment you heard it, right?
I knew I could leave this one to you, but it is undeniably, like, I mean, I feel like every song on this record has a very distinct identity and is a highlight, and especially the middle 4 songs.
Yeah. There is definitely kind of a setup and denouement thing, but yeah, those middle 4 are kind of the big suite.
Dude, yeah, Berserk Death is sick, man.
Berserk Death is the eaten by rats of this album. Yes. It is... it's one of those black metal songs that I describe as, like, hilariously awesome. Like, you cackle with glee when you listen to it. It's like,
absolutely.
It's just so fucking fun. So we're just going to go to the middle of it, because in the middle of this sample is where the punk break happened, and I started, fucking skanking and, like, punching my cats and stuff. It was phenomenal. So let's listen to... Let's listen to Berserk Death, and then I'll allow you to talk about, like, smarter stuff than I can. So yeah, that is obviously it's the riff. It's my pick for riff of the album. It's my favorite part of the album. Is of course probably the single most over the top Satanic Warmaster stereotype riff possible, and it fucking kills. And he plays it for like 2 minutes, and it fucking rules.
Yeah, that is showing the kids how it's done, right? We were like, that is what every modern USBM band wants to sound like. And,
oh yeah, dude.
Everyone everywhere else too, right? And we were just talking about how, like, well, you really can't play the big long melodic hook riff infinitely. Sometimes you can.
Sometimes you can. If it is like a secret power metal riff, like that one kind of is,
He makes it, it's just perfectly written to turn around into itself, and it is not so, it's just spare enough, just economic enough that it's not preposterous that it does that. Right?
Well, yeah, because then he starts.
Is like,
I mean, he introduces it with like 4 repetitions, and then he kicks the synths and the vocals over it. He can juice it for like as long as he wants just by adding little textures. And it's a riff with such legs to it. I mean, the whole song is a setup to get to that riff, and that's pretty much the rest of the song. It's
well, I really like the I'm double checking the riff. Yeah. I really like the main riff here too. Like,
oh no, it's really
the first
good.
Part of the song.
Yeah, but it's like it's a setup riff. It's very good. It's like we said, the conceit of like setup riffs and payoff riffs is still here. Yeah. It's just the setup riffs are way better than they used to.
Yeah, well, here the setup riff is also super epic, and it has a slightly different. It's just like sort of more striving. The setup riff is very what is it? Wolves of Blood and Iron. Which is my favorite track off of Strength and Honor. But yeah, I also forgot about the punk beat there, and as soon as it hit, I was just like, oh yeah,
no, it's definitely like this is a very like. This seems to be a very self-conscious song. It's like, okay, I'm doing a bunch of other stuff. Here's the one for you guys, though, who know exactly what you want out of me. This is.
But the other cool thing is that it is structured a lot like. Well, you kind of already said this. It's structured a lot like Darkness Triumphator. It is still very minimal and droning. The first part of the song has some. Sort of tension-building riffs thrown in to change it up, but it is primarily that sort of charging, ascending chord riff. And the second part of the song is all one riff, right? So it is just, it's built around 2 big riffs that get repeated a really long time. It's still very disciplined songwriting.
Yeah, this is a really cool record for combining like the structural conceits of much more primitive black metal with sort of riff technology of much more advanced stuff.
That's a great way of putting it. Speaking of which, I'm sure you have something to say about this, but like, we both just were so stoked when the drop hits and he does the that lead flourish at the end of the riff.
Yeah. Fuck yeah, dude.
it's like there's always been from Corellian onward, there's always been like, people think of this as kind of like raw, non-technical music, but there were fast riffs on that were like speed metal riffs that nobody even tries to rip off. And on this record, like, it just shows how far he's come as a musician, right?
Yeah, and that really makes me go back to stuff like Gorgoroth. Early Gorgoroth records are littered with crazy little lead flourishes. I mean, the most obvious one everyone knows is like the tapping riff on the self-titled song. But like Infernus as a guitarist was a serious guitarist. He was playing a lot of the time more minimal riffs because that's what the song called for. But it's not that he wasn't capable of more. And, Satanic Warmaster, it's the same principle at work. He can play guitar seriously. You can hear his appreciation of 80s heavy metal and hard rock and stuff in a lot of the stuff that he does. He just only breaks that out in certain moments where it makes sense. It's that combination of like ability and restraint that defines the best black metal.
Yeah, I like that. The we also should briefly mention the lyric at the beginning, which is "Enter the megachasm of berserk death," which is just so sick.
I did look it up. Apparently it is megachasm, but megachasm is cooler. Honestly,
We're gonna roll with that.
A big hole is cooler than space.
A big hole is space. It's just a more poetic way of putting it.
Oh, fuck, man.
Yeah. All right. But, yeah, like, there's just cool lyrical moments on all these songs. While we're talking about this one, we should briefly we just can. Since it's so short, we can mention every song. So we briefly should mention the other one that's sort of for the hood is Duke's Ride.
Yeah, Duke's Ride, it's just, that one's a little bit longer. That has some more kind of like complex, like middle bridge stuff going on. I thought about sampling that one, but then as soon as I heard Berserk Death, I was like, sorry, buddy, that's gonna happen.
Agreed. And Berserk Death is more characteristic of the record. Duke's Ride has a bunch of fast stuff on it, and it has one of the only other sort of Corellian-type riffs on it. Although kind of briefly, and then it fades into the background. Mm-hmm. But, it delivers on these, like, soaring hooks. But it's structured in a more strange, adventurous, symphonic black metal type way. And feels, runs surprisingly, right? Werewolf did an AMA on Reddit.
He hangs out on Reddit a lot, actually.
So he did an AMA, and someone asked him what his favorite French black metal record was, and he didn't say the ones that we always thought. He said Osculum Infame, which actually predates Seigneur Voland, and at least anything coherent put out by Crystal Nacht. It's so Osculum Infame was like, that may be the actual origin of this entire chording style.
You've mentioned them on the show a few times.
We've sampled them once or twice, and it's basically like more Norse second. It's both closer to Norse second wave and symphonic. It has keys, and it has this kind of more sort of florid vampiric comic book thing that I think Werewolf has been going for in a lot of his recent stuff. Mm-hmm. But it also has those sort of Franco-Finnish chords, basically like fully evolved in 1990, 98 or something, 97. But yeah, so you get some, I think, like one source for, it may be that on this record he's, really digging into the, obviously also, like, we don't have only one favorite record, right? And I feel like the way you prepare someone for the new record coming out is you mention the favorite record that's really relevant. Mm-hmm. And so, like, some of the more flamboyant stuff on this, like Duke's Ride or whatever, are very Osculum Infame, I'd say.
Yeah, I can feel that.
Yeah. So, let's listen to The Eye of Satan. This is a banger.
Yeah.
obligatory patriotic chorus.
Well, yeah, I like that it's timed out. That is when he switches to singing in Finnish.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Sounds hard as fuck in Finnish.
And he's like right up against he's right up against the mic, so you can hear all the weird trills and stuff they do.
Yeah, no, like the sort of the fantasy goblin recedes, and it's just just an angry Finn.
Someone got within 10 feet of him at the bus stop, and it's not okay.
Yeah. Real shit. And so it obviously that's a mood wise. It really sounds like Sealand Vaholinen. Like I almost
that does.
Or and mood. It's more, the lead is more elaborate than Goat Moon, but also kind of Goat Moony, and it's sort of folk melody thing. I almost wondered if there was a guest vocal on here, but I think it's him. What sets this apart is there is this real ear for folk melody that marks the Finnish versions of these riffs from the American imitations of them.
Well, yeah, because like the real folk stuff, it's one of those weird situations where the most authentic folk stuff actually sounds like more stereotypical than the imitative shit. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like you're imagining like a lute melody, and you're just planting that directly in the song, whereas people would try to make it like less idiosyncratic. If they're just imitating
try to make it more heavy metal-y or whatever.
It was sort of like that. It was like that one time you played that fucking I think it was like a Blood Axis song or something. And the chorus had this very goofy medieval melody on it, but it's like that's how you tell it's authentic, because it's not cool to modern tastes. Yeah,
and people have taken that and tried to exaggerate it in various ways, right? It's basically those sort of like folk gestures get elaborated into hyper florid. People basically hear the way that a riff like that could sound kind of odd to someone. Oh, that's not a heavy metal riff or whatever, and exaggerate it into this kind of the stuff you call friendly cat. Right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely Friendly Cat is descended in great part from Satanic Warmaster just misunderstanding it completely.
Yes. Here in this riff, that cat is not friendly.
No, he's an ornery one. That
is a very angry cat.
That's less apples and more Moira right there.
Yeah. It's however, the other thing to talk about is this song, although it is basically very focused on demolishing everything, it is a lot happens in it. It's 5 minutes long. This is structured more like a conventional black metal song, but really skillfully. And we started out on this, storming power chord section. And it's a great example of how you can play melodies like that, how you can have parts like that don't sound just like knockoff Norwegian sort of grinding chords stuff, that really that have the epic and noble atmosphere we associate with Finnish stuff and with a lot of the best modern black metal. And really, he was voicing those like Spite Extreme Wing. It's I don't know if that's obviously nobody like.
Nobody listens to Spite Extreme
Wing. Nobody listens to Spite Extreme Wing. But, whatever he was doing, kind of like inverted power, like chords with power, it sounded a lot like power chords, but with a lot more tension in them. Maybe they were like inverted or something. The whole way of phrasing it, that's all Dorian melody. It's just very severe. You pointed out a cool AAB structure.
Oh yeah, the initial riff that starts that sample has one of those odd configurations that's kind of like set up for a vocal idea.
Yeah. So that riff is fantastic, and that's why this track is one of my favorites. It just does that so well, and it makes it it carries the same. It's a really good storming kind of power chordish riff that remains epic. I just said that already. It's and then eventually we get to the big atmospheric part, when you come back in from it, there's like this bridge section, and it's only then we get to the it's only then we get to the finished folk black song hidden at the end of the record, at the end of the song, right? Mm-hmm. It's a lot happens there. So speaking of a lot happening, or more ambitious structures, at least, you've got your next sample.
Yeah. So my last one is Barbas X Amon. That's the last track on the record. This is really interesting. This record is kind of like divided into two parts, where the more, as I read it, conventional Satanic Warmaster stuff is up front, and then the last couple tracks take a big turn for a much darker sort of direction. Much more second wavy from riff to riff. And Barbas X Amon really strikes me pretty directly as a sort of tribute to Burzum, which I assume has probably always been an understated influence in Satanic Warmaster's music. Just because different people of different ages listen to Burzum and take different things away from it. You know, you can interpret Burzum in so many different ways and get stuff that sounds nothing like each other. But here, this is...
And back in the late 90s, it's not like... Now it's like, you know, there is a tragic excess of one-man black metal projects, right? Back in the day, it's not like that was particularly common. And who is your type? If you decide you're going to do something like that, you're thinking, I'm going to do something like Burzum. Right. Yeah.
I mean, that was the only model really at the time.
No.
So, and this is interesting because you can kind of draw the thread between like Detzom Var and a lot of early Satanic Warmaster, but this is more specifically like sort of Satanic Warmaster's take on Dunkelheit in very direct ways. So let's give this a listen, and this is pretty much a 2-riff song with key accompaniment. Let's just listen to. I want to get your thoughts on: is the second wave influence more pronounced on this record, or am I just hearing a greater trend in Finnish black metal in general? So yeah, obviously, the construction of that first riff is a take on Dunkelheit. You can't. It might be unfair to be like, oh, Dunkelheit is the blueprint for all of these sorts of slow swaying arpeggiated riffs for black metal forever, but it kind of is. you know?
No, that is Dunkelheit.
Yeah, that's Dunkelheit.
I thought that too as soon as I heard it.
Yeah, and also if the sample started a little bit earlier, you'd hear it more, but the key patch you can hear at the end, those very, like, rounded but still kind of twinkling deep tones on that, I think is, like, an attempt at replicating the key tone on Dunkelheit, so I think it's a specific thing. But then it opens up into bigger territory that's a little bit more familiar to Satanic Warmaster, but it still strikes me, those following couple riffs strike me as a lot more Gorgoroth than they do kind of the Finnish patterning. And we've discussed the idea of Gorgoroth being an essential influence to the French style and the Finnish style, but I don't know if I've ever heard... I don't think I've ever heard Satanic Warmaster be as directly referential to Norwegian second wave stuff as he is on this record, but you're more tapped into the modern Finnish scene than I am, so that's my question is this something distinct to this record, or is this a broader trend across the regional scene?
Well, we talked about that at the beginning. I mean, I think it's a broader Finnish trend that Werewolf is partially responsible for starting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That said, Burzum is certainly not something that comes up a lot in Finnblack, at least not in any of the major lanes. So I think that is very unusual. I was surprised to hear that. I mean, it makes sense because the dude loves black metal, and so probably likes Burzum. But like, I was surprised to hear that. So that is unusual. Things sounding more and more like Gorgoroth, not so much. I mean, like, White Death sounds a lot like Gorgoroth, too, and in similar ways.
Yeah.
But you're right that although those are all Satanic Warmaster chords, the slow processional vibe and the kind of darker way it turns around at the end, that is really Infernus. I hear exactly what you mean. And from the midst of an actual storming blizzard, at least in my neck of the woods, we bring you Innermost by Hate Forest on Osmose. So, 2 years, it's basically 2 years on the dot after Hour of the Centaur, which was the big comeback record. That was also released by surprise, and I suspect these are just timed for the winter solstice. And so that came out. This is clearly the sign, hey, Hate Forest is truly back, right? Senko's going to keep writing songs for it. It's not stopping. There's a, sorry, which is cool to hear. There's going to be I haven't seen it in the YouTube comments so much, but I think there's going to be a tendency for people to hear this as his war record, right? Because Ukraine's been fighting for its existence, or a large part of its territory, for almost a year now. And this was recorded in December 2021, which means it was written at least somewhat prior to that. Although I could imagine him writing it very quickly. So, and the mood is way less martial than Hour of the Centaur. There's always one Hate Forest sound, but there's a spectrum of moods. And this is a lot more distant. Could you think about it as part of the build-up to war? Probably, right? I mean, there were long months of increasing tensions. I think the Ukrainians knew what was coming. Or a lot of them did. I think Senko and the Kharkov crew have known what was coming seemingly their entire lives, right? We talked about that earlier this year. It was just like, wow, looks like these guys were validated. But, so there was this long, tense build-up. And you could maybe see this as part of that context. Because there is long, drawn-out tension, and diminishing hope as a mood on this record. And it kind of pulls, mood-wise, it's kind of pulling in two different directions, both of which kind of make sense in the context of build-up to war. On the one hand, this seems like it's a shift towards Hate for It, where the last one was just very expressive and colorful, relatively speaking, for Hate Forest, and very, focused on history and war and whatnot. This is aiming to be the bleakest, most remote, inhuman Hate Forest record, or at least to harken back to things like purity. And the cover suggests that. It's maybe the most abstract cover we've ever had. I bet it looks like it's zoomed in on just the sky of a painting. Until it just becomes texture. Really cool. The song titles are almost entirely about vast, empty, silent spaces, although they're often silent when they have like winds howling through them. And the riffing is really, like the Satanic Warmaster, the riffing is deliberately stripped back here in some ways. There are often, maybe not long, but important melodies in Hate Forest songs. This is much more focused on basic phrases, the building blocks of building blocks, elemental just Senko motifs, and the production template is basically the opposite of Hour of the Centaur. Right? That one was, we can get into it, but this one is cold and austere. On the other hand, this has got to be the most, I feel like it has more sentimental, romantic chording on it than any other Hate Forest record. And I think that's spilling over from Windswept and indirectly from Drudk. This is, although the production is just loud, cold, hostile, and the songs are deliberately remote, there's a lot of motifs in this that have that kind of aching melancholy that makes it into a lot of that Windswept and Drudk stuff. So it's sort of, yeah, that's the spectrum here. There's something interesting about this one, which is that the death metal guy who for years has always said, I just don't get Hate Forest, not my thing. Doesn't make sense to me, don't like it. But who did like the Precambrian EP? The death metal guy likes this?
Well, how the turns have tabled. I really like this album. I was very surprised. Obviously, I'm going to listen to it, but I was like, okay, it's another Hate Forest record. This is going to be another thing that I appreciate from a distance, but absolutely does not work for me as a listener. And this one actually really worked. Apart from the stuff that I've heard off of the most ancient ones, this is probably my favorite Hate Forest material that I've heard. Mm-hmm. And I was really trying to figure out why. And then kind of while you were doing the intro there, it occurred to me that, for instance, I like a couple Druidka albums, really. I'd say probably like a third of the material I like, 2/3 I'm not really into. Never really liked Hate Forest up to this point. But I really like Precambrian, and I really like little bits of the little bits of Windswept that I've heard. So I'm thinking that I guess my thing is I like Sanko's style when it's like diving into a real niche within this broader style that he has. Like Precambrian is the Precambrian record is a one-trick pony in a good way. It's concentrated on this rigorous conceit of form, and it really works within those constraints. Innermost is, like you said, very stripped down and very primordial, but I think that by taking away some of those things, it allowed me to appreciate what Hate Forest is really about. And I like it when Sanko goes into this sort of primordial elemental mode. So Innermost really struck me for a few reasons. One, it just feels to my ears and to the way I'm used to hearing it much more aggressive than most Hate Forest. And a lot of that has to do with this production that's like super in your face and just like loud and clattering in a really cool way. I really love the vocal performance. The riffs are really cool, but as you said, they are elemental. They're like almost ghostly. This is not a riffs record by any means. But really what this strikes me as comparable to is probably the absolute most aggressive moments of something like Branacald, which I'm really into. Obviously, Sanko is, probably 2 degrees away from Blazebirth Hall through some sort of connection, and it's obvious that he's always appreciated that music. This is the record that I've heard that sounds the most distinctly like Blazebirth Hall, and especially like early Branacald stuff before it got into sort of pure drone territory. Mm-hmm. So in general, yeah, I think this just seizes on the most identifiable parts of Hate Forest for me, strips it down and makes an album just about those things that I can identify with. So it's sort of like shucked away the things that I don't really understand and just left me with this really hard carbon core of the constituent elements that make this band sound and Roman Sanko's sound in certain regards. I say all this, I really like this record. This makes me think of Hate Forest differently, which is why I knew that you wouldn't really be into it. Because my guess was, okay, so I don't like other Hate Forest, but I really, really like this one. This is like a transformative thing for me experiencing this band. That means that the guy who really likes Hate Forest is probably not going to like this one.
Well, so first of all, I'm glad you like it, right? And the things you're latching onto here are real qualities of Hate Forest. Yeah, so the production here is going to appeal more to your death metal ear, right? This is the most forward and loud production he's had. Although in many ways it's also more conventionally black metal because it's highly distorted, harsh and buzzing. It's almost more like a Marduk tone. But it's more MIDI than, the really, really raw trebly stuff. the very forward Hour of the Centaur honestly had basically an equally loud production, but there was more breadth in it.
Yeah, the Hour of the Centaur sounded like it had a lot of headroom. Like it was a record that was recorded a little bit quieter and then went through the mastering process. This one sounds like it was recorded really loud.
Yeah, Hour of the Centaur, the production gives room for the broad, jangling folk chording that he's really focused on there. And for that record was really focused on bringing out the acoustic qualities of his playing and the power of the picking and stuff. This is still gonna give you a good idea of the instrumental performance, right? But it's like very narrow. Would you say much narrower sonic bandwidth?
It's very saturated. It seems like there's a lot more compression on stuff. The other Hate Force tends to have kind of a cool mix. There's a lot of space in it. Here, all that space is filled.
Yeah, and it is the general loudness, that tendency that is sort of in both the latest records comes from the Windswept and Precambrian records, where he's playing with a live band, unlike here, where he's with a drum machine, and where he's going for this very in-your-face kind of jam room sound. And so that's carried over to this. So that makes sense as a thing you could do in the possibility space of Hate Forest, right? Just do one that's just really kind of down the line and pummeling. I think, though, like, the thing for me is that these are, the first track is awesome. I think there's strong stuff on the first three of them. And some other cool moments in the later tracks, but on average, these are, like, hands down the worst riffs of any Hateful.
I was listening to you just, like, agonize your way to it.
I was,
a man trapped in a desert crawling towards the oasis.
Well, we had to talk about the production, but yeah, it also had to be said, And so that's not because they're short and pared back. His other records are full of extremely minimal riffs that are just a lot better. There are, of course, plenty of just basic architectural riffs on this that are fine, right? And there are some big riffs that are great. But these are... At this point, if you've listened to Hate Forest, and especially if you've listened to Windswept and Precambrian, these are sort of, these really seem like echoes of riffs. Or fragments of riffs, but not in the, like, cool, reductive way, just fragments of better riffs. And, like, part of the reason this band has always been great is that although it is extraordinarily minimalist music, and always has been, even sometimes the two-note riff is the big riff, right? Mm-hmm. There's always been an extreme distinctness to the riff, there's been craft in them, and even though they are really riffs and not melodies, they have a real sort of melodic ear to them. The melodic ear for Hate Forest, like, as Hour of the Centaur revealed, core to Hate Forest is that ear for folk melody. That's been really pared back here, which is maybe one reason it's more to your taste. That's not necessarily a problem. Sorrows is more like that too, a little less folky. You could say that about Purity maybe, but I think not so much. I think Sorrows is kind of analogous to this, but this is way more in your face than Sorrows. And so... And I almost wonder if downplaying the folkiness has just he's just deliberately removed something that was fundamental to his technique, and it's not, like, working. But, he can write good death metal riffs, right? Precambrian has a lot of Jasenko riffs, but it has death metal riffs. Rottenfänger has some good death metal riffs.
I feel like the death metal comes out a lot on this record in particular. Like, I hear it more distinctly. Like, I can hear it when you point it out on like the Scythia demo, but here it seems very immediate that a lot of these are death metal riffs.
Yeah, well, the other thing, you know, weirdly, the most death metal stuff is actually the classic Hate Forest records. Like, when you said, like, you didn't really like it except for, like, the most ancient ones, that and Purity are, like, the canonical records. And I've gone back and forth, but I think I like the most ancient ones better.
Yeah, I've always known Purity as, like, the essential record.
People tout that one because it's extremely minimalist, and I think basically just because it has one or two bangers on it that appeal to modern sensibilities. So the Gates, although it's really sparse and slow, it just has this epic Dorian moment in it that is built to like a chorus, and that I think just a lot of people are just like, yes, this is it. This is the most awesome thing. The most ancient ones is equally epic, just but like riffier, more bolt throwery, more severe, and very folk drony. And you know, I think the records have always been loud, but they've been mixed to turn up. The most ancient ones, like, you know, like how early Emperor, right, is mixed quiet, but you turn it up and then it's like really loud and bludgeoning.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the idea. It's a lo-fi way of creating sonic space. And so that's how those old records work. But like this one, I mean, I guess in some sense this might be one of like my least interesting takes this year, in that I'm going to say something that record critics often say, which is like, it just sounds like these are culled from the cutting room floor of other projects, namely Windswept and Precambrian.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I get where you're coming from. I think there's something about the sort of we've talked about this. I have more time for these sort of like hyper simplified gestural riffs than you do.
Bad
like
riffs.
Bad riffs. I like bad riffs. No, it's like I like the sort of like so pared down they're almost abstract figures that you'll get.
But I like those too. I just think these aren't good.
Well, let's listen to some good ones from this album.
Yeah, all right. All right. So yeah, let's get into your sample. The first song is awesome.
Yeah,
right?
This is just the opening of the record. It's Those Who Howl Inside the Snowstorm. I think these are really good riffs. One thing I want to point out is, so a lot of Hate Forest stuff treads around this sort of these sort of steps folk melodies that reach into territory that sounds almost like East Asian sometimes. Here, that sensibility is really front and center on the record, which gives it almost like a Phrygian thrash thing, but it also makes it kind of like a bolt thrower thing, which, as we know, is like central to Hate Forest. And I think that's where some of the death metal is coming out more distinctly for me. But yeah, as soon as this one fired up, I was like, oh, this is going to be very different from what I'm used to with these guys. All right, so that's just 4 riffs laid end to end, and I think all of them are really cool. Hate Forest has always been constructed in this deliberately simplified, sort of blocky manner. But I think, especially, I think in general, but especially on this record, Sanko's got a real ear just for riff pacing and, like, developing mood in the intersection between riffs. You know, that's a sequence that takes you on a really cool narrative journey, and I like the restraint of not throwing vocals over any of those, all of which would have worked to have vocals. But he gives it time, he gives it a couple minutes to breathe before everything really gets started. So, like, right up front, you've got one of those Phrygian kind of riffs that I was talking about very distinctly. Then, sort of a more relaxed, blaze-birthy riff. Then we get into, you were saying it was the melodic catchy one that you said that was a take on, like, a previous song?
Yeah, so I can do that for biz. The song starts off with that sort of Phrygian thrash thing you're thinking.
Yeah.
That's like a sort of pared back, more death or old school black metal-y it's a more power chordy version of pretty sure that's like the Storm of Scythian Arrows riff. So it's like it's reprising a rhythmic that sort of jangling horseman rhythmic figure that was at the end of Hour of the Centaur. But here in a much more death metal voicing, more thrashy. And then, the big catchy hook is kind of like, I think it's basically a reprise of the riff to the Gates. It does the same thing, as in it's a monolithic 2-chord sequence that depends on a change in the bass note to make it really epic. And over that, you have, but the thing he's changed is that now he has this, he's also playing this second stratum over it. He's playing this sort of lyrical yearning trill riff that's a lot like a Windswept riff.
Yeah. I like the like intense contrast between these ideas, but they all, you know, they play the part of like individual scenes in you know, the narrative of the song. And I really like just hearing those sort of like Sanko chord shapes and motifs presented in this like way more upfront, way more in your face manner. I mean, we could debate all day over, you know, how we hear aggression or something, but this strikes me as like aggressive in more or a different way from other Hate Forest stuff, and one that just clicks with me more immediately.
Yeah, well, you know, it's really loud. And if there's that definitely, I mean, I can see why the loudness increases the sense of aggression. You know,
and the harsh vocals and their atmosphere of hate and anguish.
Also, if there's anything else that's different about it, I wonder, now that I'm listening to how you describe it, I wonder if it's not that there's more rapid movement between the riffs, or more rapid movement between dramatically contrasting riffs.
I mean, I think that's part of it. I think that this is a record in general. Hate Forest records don't tend to be very long, but there's something about the pacing of this record that is more immediate. There's much fewer parts where they're just kind of hanging on to a single melodic figure for like a really extended period.
I think that's fair. Yeah, this is totally an attempt to write the sort of like the punchy kind of. Well, I feel like it's just, you know, I feel like there's a record to be made that is just really punchy, direct, succinct, kind of hooky Hate Forest, and this song would be a template for it. But at the same time, this song also sounds like it could have been on Hour of the Centaur. It like, if you, and it's like, I would say basically, if you like this song, you like Hate Forest. Like, this is the most folky song on the record. It's the only one that has the sort of folk the sort of folk drone on it. In that second riff you described as more Branacaldi.
Yeah. I think that might be a thing. It's like, I think I might just like the folk drone used as more of a sparing technique rather than as like a dominant feature across a record.
Yeah, and so that's a meaningful taste difference. I get that. And so, that's an important thing to say about this.
And just to clarify, I think it's a cool technique, but I think my issue is the folk drone kind of like it's like a gravity well. You know, it kind of like, when you have the folk drone there, it kind of sucks all the other ideas into it, which is the point, you know? But it does make things much less distinct when they're all bound together by that feature, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And that's a black metal, death metal taste difference. So I get that. So for new listeners, because maybe we'll get some new listeners, when we talk about the folk drone, right, by drone, well, we can talk about that in a lot of different ways, arguably bolt thrower drones. But like Hate Forest on the classic records, and also on also, at least to a great extent on the last one, Hour of the Centaur, almost always has the lowest string on the guitar going under every other chord. And even if he doesn't do that, he's still writing these riffs that are highly rooted in oscillation of chords or melodic figures over a strong trimmed root note, rather than just like a single chord or a single melodic phrase. So every riff you hear is moving over this single continuous droning note. And so here, he does that technique as a one-off, right? It's not running throughout the whole song, but you can hear him lock into that root tonality and then flare these chords out over it. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Yes, you would. Yeah, I get that, and that's also one way it's like Precambrian. But yeah, the basic sequence of riffs, these are all classic but really, really good Hate Forest riffs. And I like the drama and the pacing here. You know, and yeah, I get why it would not be your preference. Like, why I love the feeling of just infinite riff and everything being pulled into that gravity well. And I totally get why you want more high contrast parts. You like Morbid Angel.
You like Morbid Angel too.
I like Morbid Angel too, but I mean that's a hallmark for your taste. That's a great example of a band that has very clearly demarcated.
No, I get exactly what you mean.
Yeah. You know, like that is Morbid Angel is architectural music, and Hate Forest is much more like sawing step fiddle music.
Yeah, I feel
much more. It's more the Hate Forest, like Morbid Angel's like architecture. Hate Forest is like wind.
It's a sprawling landscape.
Exactly. So, I don't know. So what I figured for the sampling, so I guess I just feel like that song is by far the best on the record. And I would love to hear a whole record that sounded like that. It sort of is like that for the first 3 tracks, but I think the majority of the record's length is actually the last 3. So I'm going to follow up each of the death metal guys' samples with a sample that's the bad version of the thing.
Jesus.
No, it's not to prove you. It's not to prove you.
No, I just think it's hilarious to think that this is the situation we're in on a Hate Forest review.
Yeah, I think if anything, I'm probably being harsher because it's one of my favorite bands. You know what I mean?
No, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know the meme is that I'm a Senko simp, but you know, you gotta stop simping somewhere. And the point is right. Like these riffs strike me as a big part of why they don't have the same power for me, is they're not as original and distinct. And part of that is the problem is that I'm a completist. So most people who have this record probably haven't listened to multiple albums by Windswept or Precambrian, but I have. I know where these are coming from. And, you know, I've said this before on the show, like, Senko's, like, baseline material is, like, still, in many ways, just better than almost everyone else's. Like, he just has these really cool, dense, textured ways of harmonizing things. He has a sophisticated ear, real cool play of melody and dissonance. All of those basic characteristics are present on this album. And if you want an introduction to Hate Forest, like if this is your first Hate Forest record and you like it, great. Then you'll really like the other stuff. Unless you're looking for that more death metal-y feeling, in which case maybe Precambrian. But yeah, so I want to, so like, these aren't necessarily bad riffs, but they're bad by his standards. And so we're going to go to Temple of the Great Eternal Night. Now, that title promises a lot, and the song is 8 minutes. It's the longest on the record, right after the middle break of the album. Starts off with a pretty cool AAB hybrid. It's very vicious, very attacking. The first phrase is a stock sort of Hate Forest grinding chords. The second is this simple but really powerful epic turnaround. Also kind of like Stuff in the Gates. And this is one of the only other moments on the record that sounds folky. But then...
So just to be clear about the terms established here, the intent is that I'm not supposed to like the dun 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 riff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I do like it. That's the problem.
No, see, it's not bad as it is. It's one of your first times really paying attention to a Hate Forest riff like that, and so you're gonna like it. It's inherently awesome. However, that's a stock moment in Hate Forest songs where it's a classic thing. The blasting drops off and you roll into this epic bolt thrower triplet and you do this drone string, snaky, sinuous melody that sounds maybe more majestic than some of the more pummeling stuff around it. It's a Hallmark kind of moment. It makes sense that you like it, but like, as far as his versions of this riff, this one is like procedurally generated. Da, 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 da. You can hear it. It's a great example of a grid-written riff. It is just moving on even quarter notes and half notes, just crawling up the scale. And he's written fantastic riffs that are basically just scales. The best guitarists can get away with that. Like the last track on the Windswept album basically is a scale. It sounds like Hate Forest, and it's a scale riff, and it's awesome. But in this case, it just seems like, there is none of the inflection. It has more notes in it than a lot of his riffs like this, and none of the inflection. And it's, the only thing that distinguishes it at all is the turnaround, which is just that two downwardly slashing chords. But once you've heard his stuff, it's just like, yeah, of course, he's going to introduce more dissonance there. Okay, that's it. What do you like about it?
Well, I don't even want to talk now. My feelings are hurt. I like, there are cases where I don't think I fundamentally disagree with you that a lot of this record does come off as like generic, but I think it reaches a sort of like superposition of being generic that becomes its own sort of austere character. The fact that all of these riffs are sort of so fundamental and granular, the nondescript grayness of this record when combined with the really intense overheated aggression, I find really interesting. There's a real atmosphere to this album that's caused by the juxtaposition of almost the flatness of the melodic content with the like intense heat behind the drums and the vocals. It's battering chaos and like intensity and focus, but it's like remembering a dream or something. You know, it's brutal, but it's ephemeral at the same time. And I can see how that could be a problem, but I think that's cool.
So that's a good case for it, right? And I mean, I didn't say it up front, but I like, given that, I have just the utmost respect for this guy's work, people like this do things very deliberately. It's possible in 6 months I'll be like, you know what, death metal guy, that's a great record. And if that happens, I'll say it on the show, right? I will publicly eat my hat. But I think that's what it's going for. I just think you could do that and he could write a geometric riff like that I think is just more cool or engaging. And I get that at that point we're just sort of arguing. It becomes micro-argumentation, right?
Yeah, it just becomes arguments over what riff is cooler, basically.
And I know I'm never going to be able to explain, like, why 1, 2... Or I could, but we won't put them through it. Why 1, 2 chord riff is better than another. And a lot of it has to do with just the fact that once you become acquainted with this guy's stock of gestures, you're just like, well, okay, I've heard 16 better versions of that. Or 16 versions of it that are more or less equivalent, etc. But so two more, I want to do a side-by-side comparison with a similar moment. And so maybe this will give some comparative reference points. So that's a big riff. The song foregrounds it. It's the center of the song. It's given a lot of significance. It has more notes than most of these. Let's compare it with another flagged big riff from the most ancient ones. This is off of the title track. So that riff in some way is simpler than the riff from Innermost, but it is that is an extremely distinctive and authoritative riff that has this inflection and timing in it that just comes across to me as way stronger.
Yeah, that's interesting because they scan as like, yes, obviously it's the same basic figure. Like basic rhythmic figure and sort of like melodic gesture, but they come off completely differently to me. Like in terms of mood and like what's being expressed. Like technically, yeah, I mean that's unmistakable. Basically the same thing is happening, but I feel like the aggregate effect of it is like radically different.
Well, I get that like this one is a lot more sort of violent. And
yeah, it's a lot more
stern.
The one
in the middle of it's more stern. The one in the middle of in the middle of Temple of the Great Eternal Night is sort of more sprawling and majestic, and is also that's what it's going for, and it's also supposed to be more stable and orderly. But like, I think, honestly, dude, I sampled that one because I've already sampled Innermost Winter on the show. Innermost Winter is the one. Innermost Winter has a moment like that too, and the riff is like one of the classic epic Hate Forest riffs. And you always say you've said you like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a classic. You can see maybe he's trying to tie this whole album to the track Innermost Winter, right? Mm-hmm. And so obviously, listeners, I'd recommend checking it out. But there's a similar thing. It's just the riff is more bespoke and unique. Part of that has to do with the folkiness of it in Innermost Winter, as well as the most ancient ones. But it also just has to do with the fact that they're bespoke, especially in the one I just played, like that is also kind of a bolt thrower riff.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
As well, and then you get that huge grinding death metal riff after the big one.
Exactly. So it's been crafted to be. It's very close to a bajillion other riffs, but and it has like 4 notes, but it's been crafted to be exactly that. And another thing I like there, other than you can hear the undertone of drone, but there's also something I didn't even notice till yesterday, maybe from the headphones. There's always this nebulous billowing noise in the background of the old Hate Forest records. Mm-hmm. And some of it's just guitar noise and drum clatter. But there's actually a synth tone there that moves up. Dum, 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 behind it, and it just sort of like booms and billows out and recedes. And I get that that's a kind of textural density that is not what this record is going for, but I wanted to point out that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I get you. I think that really what this is coming down to is like these are like micro differences in taste, like adding up to macro differences of opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So let me get to another one that I like, which is off Ice Cold Bloodless Veins. And I want to go back to that thing that I said about Blazebirth Hall. So I think that's like really prominently featured on this record. Like I said, the most aggressive moments of Brannicold, or on this track in particular, Nitberg, which you know better than me. So I'm wondering if it's a pretty apt comparison. So this is just a really good example of really interesting use of like super high contrast melodic ideas and like some really sawing dissonant stuff up front. Just really gives that feeling of, Brannicold, where it just feels like sheets of ice kind of crashing down vertically. I think this is just an awesome way to open this track. I just really like all those riffs. And I like the austere, blocky quality of them just being, dropped next to each other. But there are intricacies in there. That opening riff, that dun 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 figure actually goes through a ton of micro variations, because that's kept going for probably a minute 20 there. But he keeps adding in these little variations, but the variations are coming inside the riff. He's adding passing tones that he skips over in earlier iterations on it. So there's this kind of there's something very granular about the way that it develops. It's it's starting as the most elemental building blocks, and then it becomes something more full, like the fully developed version of the riff, but it's still not it's a riff that's sort of deliberately absent of meaning. It's weird, furtive minor key tones in the middle, and then it just sort of balloons out into this expansive kind of dissonant chord at the end. There's no resolution, there's no sort of internal logic to it, but it's just very cool. And then it breaks into a sequence of riffs that, again, slowly sort of acclimatize the listener and add more conventional melodic ideas, but those are still sort of discarded by big sheets of sawing dissonance at the end. I think it's a really cool conceit for riffcraft, and I like the way the song develops, adding more of these sort of approachable, sort of emotive elements, but wiping the slate clean at the end of every cycle with that dissonance. It's neat.
I don't necessarily hear all those turnarounds as dissonant as you do. I feel like the roots often follow places that make sense melodically, but I hear what you mean generally, and I think that's a really good a way of putting it.
Yeah, maybe not dissonant. Strictly dissonant isn't the right word. He's throwing in very unusual augments on higher strings.
It's strained and deliberately harsh versions of these kind of lush chords. Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Yeah, this is a cool song. I would sort of pair it with Whiteout Silence from the back half of the record. I think there's almost an entire record in these two songs if he wants to do it. Or these two songs, more things like these combined with more things like the heaviest parts of the record, like Those Who Howl. Yeah, this is very cool. As far as the Blazebirth Hall, I definitely hear that. That occurred to me at some other point listening to the record, and I can't remember when. However, not so much Nitberg. Nitberg was the album we're talking about, Nagalred, was much later. And it was, it's actually probably influenced by Hate Forest.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't really sound directly like it at all, but there's a sort of parallel language. Yeah, Nagalred is 2010.
There's definitely a parallel language between Nitberg and Hate Forest.
I think the BBH stuff may have been influential early in the Ukrainian stuff, and it's sort of always there. And I think you're right that here where it gets the most sort of, it's really abstract and severe, but at the same time has these weirdly emotive, expressive melodies and chords. That is very Blazebirth. Yeah.
Yes, I guess that's the thing. It's this is a Hate Forest record that hits my priors. This is the one that hits the shit that I already generally like about extreme metal, more directly.
Well, I think you would really like, the Windswept records. Some of them they're not as sparse as these, but they're still relatively sparse, and they have just some massive versions of those kinds of riffs.
Okay.
But in some sense, what he's doing, I agree that there's a deliberate reduction approach here. He's taking, there might be a full 8-chord phrase that has this yearning romanticism to it, and here he's deliberately sort of truncating it and sort of smearing stranger chords across it and stuff. There's nothing technically even in a song like this, there's nothing really that you wouldn't hear on a Windswept record, but he's focusing on a specific method. So, the thing is, I guess on the one, right, he's trying to make a really aggressive Hate Forest record, but also a really atmospheric one, right? Is, I think, the idea. Like, what is Hate Forest? Well, it's aggressive and atmospheric. Okay, I'm going to make one that is super pummeling and in your face, but also because of the, the minimalism is going to be, you're going to have to listen to it as atmospheric music. The thing is, like, so that was a good version of those ideas, and then there are bad versions of those ideas, like Solitude and Starry December, the finale. And again, part of what makes these ideas not so good is that they're just sort of worn out. If you've heard Windswept, if you've heard the more lush parts of Hour of the Centaur, or the more sort of sorrowful parts of it, or if you've heard Sorrows, that sort of last old Hate Forest album, you've heard like a ton of riffs that are phrased like the like that's sort of a classic phrase. It's good in context in that song, but it's one of this language of there's a language he's drawing on here from Windswept that is pretty familiar. And in Solitude and Starry December, by the time you get here, you've heard like 24 better versions of this specific riff in Solitude and Starry December. And he's like drawing on this phrase again and again throughout the record. And when it's in Windswept, it's part of these big expressive melodies. But here it becomes like this sort of just an emotional cue, like a trope. Okay, so doom 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 doom, right? That's like a pretty melodic phrase, but isolated like this, it's just this kind of sad little ditty that it conveys a kind of it's like new Droog melancholy, which just is just not an emotion that belongs on a Hate Forest record. I understand adding more sorrow, grief to a Hate Forest record, but like primary emotion. But this sort of like subtle shading and the sort of sentimentality, I think it just doesn't fit with the character of the band. And it's also like Hate Forest should deal in like uncompromising emotions, right? Just primary, like, this is sorrow, right? You know what you've lost, and you're in terrible pain over it. Melancholy, you aren't sure what you lost, but you feel it's back there or out there somewhere. There's stretching and yearning. And, there's a place for that kind of emotion, and he does it, he does it well in other places, but here it comes across as just out of place and also just kind of like ineffective. And again, if you've heard it once, you've heard it before. And so I tried to find what the stem is for this. And I think it is, there may be a closer match somewhere, but I'm pretty sure the stem phrase for this is in the first track, Black Horizon is the Gates of a Blizzard, from The Great Cold Steppe by Windswept. So, very quick sample. I'm going to prove it.
so Windswept is the nice one.
Yeah, but it's like the lush... But that's the funny thing, right? The nice version shouldn't sound more powerful than the not nice one.
I get you.
You know, it's like isolated on its own. A phrase like that is kind of just impotent. And here at the beginning of the Windswept record, sure, it's got this lush production. It's more like, it's a more pleasant emotion. It's, it has the big broad chords. It sounds way more Druidky, but like I feel like that riff just is a lot, as a melodic phrase, it just is a lot stronger than the other one. In part because it's allowed to develop. So that's my criticism of the riff. I don't know if you've got anything on that. I've got one other thing I want to mention.
The Windswept riff or the Hate Forest riff?
I'm saying the Windswept is... The funny thing to me is that the Windswept riff sounds heavier than the Hate Forest riff.
I guess it's like... I mean, I like both of them. I like the Windswept riff because it's this kind of elaborate melodic figure, but I think I straight up just enjoy the things you don't like about this album. Because for me, when I hear the Hate Forest version, it's like, I like the fragmentary, isolated, unresolved nature of it. I like the fact that it doesn't develop into anything more. You know, I like how much of this record is bare sketches of a feeling or an idea. It's just these very abstract contours of it. I think maybe it's just because most of the music I listen to is like the opposite of that. It's like obsessively detailed and very emotive. And I think that it's just, maybe this is just hitting the contrast button just right for me.
Yeah, I could hear that. I mean, I think it, in addition to triggering your death metal vibes, it triggers your DSBM taste.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, like, there are things in this that, like, I wouldn't be against. Yeah, like, the touches of more expression in Hate Forest are cool. Hour of the Centaur was way more expressive than previous ones. But, yeah, the melancholy to me seems like depressive Druid. So the other thing would just be like, I get that in concept, the album you're describing sounds good to me too. Like this just like stark, broken off kind of, you know, like I get the feeling you're describing, and as you describe it, it sounds cool. But I think a big part of this is just like, how much of this is, maybe it doesn't make a difference for you, honestly, but how much of it is he in control of, and how much of it is a side effect of haste? And the thing that I think, like, I get the sense maybe he was rushing to just put out another one, but, like, there's stuff about this record structurally that, okay, you're going to describe it as, like, things just break off for no reason, they connect, they're thrown in these sort of blocky assemblies. Okay, I get that, but, like, at certain... This song, where that riff stops, you could hear those clanging chords come in. Those clanging chords go for 45 seconds and manage to suture together the first riff to a kind of standard storming part. Like, and the song just alternates between these two trope riffs. And there's a similar kind of structural, just questionable structure on track 4, on Temple of the Great Eternal Night, which I wanted to talk about. It fades out on acoustic, and he does a minute and like 40, really long acoustic section, like okay. A minute and a half at least.
To be fair, the acoustic section is without question the worst part of the album.
Yeah, and it's a big part of the album, and there's no reason for it to be there. It transitions into another kind of cool, aggressive, storming riff, but even then, it's an abrupt transition, so there's no reason he couldn't have just put it a minute and a half earlier. Yeah, the acoustic stuff is straight, like, this guy's a great guitarist, but the acoustic stuff is just, it's just unnecessary. And that signals to me a kind of slipshod structuring here that scans as like less architectural and more kind of arbitrary.